Jordan Miles never imagined that moving next door to Edgar Holt would turn his quiet suburban life into a nightmare of bullets, paranoia, and survival. What started as strange noises and eerie glances quickly escalated into a deadly encounter that would change everything. Jordan Miles had moved into the quiet suburb with the hope of finally finding a peaceful routine. After years of living in crowded apartments surrounded by constant noise, he wanted a fresh start somewhere calm, predictable, and safe. At first glance, the new neighborhood seemed like the perfect place to rebuild his life. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the streets stayed quiet after sunset, and most residents kept to themselves without being unfriendly. It was the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. At least, that was what Jordan believed when he arrived. But from the very first week, he noticed something unusual about the house next door. It belonged to Edgar Holt, a man the neighbors rarely mentioned and never visited. His windows stayed covered even during the day, and his porch light flickered at random hours like a signal only he understood. Edgar never greeted anyone. He slipped in and out of his front door at odd times, sometimes with heavy bags, sometimes empty-handed, but always moving with a strange urgency that didn't match the calm surroundings. Jordan tried not to pay attention, but small details were hard to ignore. Edgar's yard was always cluttered with rusted tools and half-finished contraptions that made no sense. The sound of metal scraping against metal would drift over the fence late at night, along with short bursts of hammering that stopped the moment anyone stepped outside. Packages arrived at Edgar's doorstep, regularly plain boxes with no labels, and he took them inside within seconds, as if he feared someone might look too closely. At first, Jordan assumed Edgar was just eccentric, a quiet man who preferred isolation. There was nothing wrong with that. But after a few days, Jordan started sensing something else, an odd feeling of being watched. When he stepped into his backyard, he sometimes caught a quick movement from Edgar's windows, like a curtain being dropped into place. The security cameras mounted on Edgar's house seemed to shift position every few days, always angling a little closer to Jordan's property. The other neighbors seemed aware of Edgar's strange habits but avoided discussing them. Whenever Jordan asked about the man next door, people either changed the subject or shrugged as if talking about Edgar would invite trouble. Their silence didn't help his growing unease. Though Jordan kept telling himself he was overthinking everything, the tension around Edgar's house lingered. It felt like an unseen pressure resting on the edge of the street, quiet, heavy, and waiting. Jordan tried to settle into his new life, unaware that the strange behavior next door would soon turn into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Troubling signs began to appear around Jordan's home, small enough to dismiss at first but unsettling enough to linger in his thoughts. One morning he noticed a set of footprints in the soft mud beneath his bedroom window. They were fresh, pressed deeply into the ground, and led toward the fence that separated his yard from Edgar Holt's property. Jordan tried to reason with himself, telling his mind it could have been a delivery driver or a child passing through, but the prints were too deliberate. They showed someone had stood directly under his window, close enough to look inside. A few days later, Jordan found his outdoor trash bin open and scattered. Items he had thrown away, receipts, old mail, and packaging were laid out as if someone had inspected them. Nothing was stolen, but the placement looked intentional, almost methodical. Jordan cleaned it up and told himself it must have been an animal. But deep down he knew an animal wouldn't arrange things neatly on the ground. Another incident followed when he discovered his back gate slightly ajar. Jordan always locked it, a habit he never broke, yet the latch hung loose as though someone had tested it. The sense of intrusion grew stronger. He checked his doors twice each night, scanned the yard from his windows, and tried to convince himself none of this had anything to do with Edgar. Still, he couldn't ignore the way the security cameras on Edgar's house seemed to inch closer toward his yard every few days. Jordan brought up his concerns during a neighborhood meeting, hoping that someone else had seen something similar. Instead, his worries were brushed aside with polite nods and comments about raccoons, teenagers, or simple coincidences. No one wanted to mention Edgar. Their avoidance felt heavy, as if he had stepped into a subject everyone had silently agreed to ignore. Things escalated when Jordan discovered a single bullet casing near the fence behind his house. It was old, dirt clinging to its edges, but finding it on his property made his stomach tighten. He didn't own a gun, and he didn't know anyone who might have dropped it. The casing felt like a warning, though he had no proof of where it came from. As the days passed, the air around his home shifted from ordinary to unnervingly still. Jordan found himself listening for sounds he never paid attention to before: the rustle of leaves, the crunch of gravel, the hum of movement beyond the fence. There was no confrontation, no clear threat, just a quiet tension building around him, hinting that something dangerous was forming out of sight. The night that would change everything began quietly, with steady rain sliding down the windows and a soft rumble of distant thunder. Jordan had settled at his desk, working late to distract himself from the recent unease creeping into his daily routine. The house felt colder than usual, the kind of cold that made the air heavy and still. Outside, the neighborhood remained calm, with only the occasional passing car breaking the silence. Nothing suggested danger until the lights suddenly snapped off. Jordan froze, startled by the abrupt darkness. The rest of the street remained fully lit, making it clear that the outage affected only his home. His pulse quickened as he searched for his flashlight, a quiet alarm rising inside him. He remembered the open gate, the discarded trash, the footprints beneath his window. Each memory now felt like a piece of a puzzle he had tried desperately to ignore. With the flashlight casting a thin beam across the hallway, Jordan moved cautiously toward the breaker panel. The house seemed to hum with tension. The rain, tapping against the roof, grew louder, echoing through the silent rooms. Just as he reached the edge of the kitchen, a sharp crack shattered the stillness. Something slammed into his shoulder, knocking him backward. A bullet had pierced the window and struck him, the force sending him stumbling to the floor. Pain surged through him, sharp and disorienting. He clamped a hand over the wound instinctively, feeling the warmth of blood spreading beneath his fingers. His heartbeat roared in his ears as the reality of the attack sank in. Another shot blasted through the room, shattering glass and splintering wood. Jordan crawled behind the counter, fighting to stay focused. The flashlight slipped from his hand and rolled across the tile, its beam shaking with every tremor in his arm. He forced himself to move, inching toward the back of the house while trying to stay low. Each breath came in short, uneven bursts as he pushed through the pain. More shots struck the walls and windows, each one puncturing the air with terrifying precision. Jordan knew he couldn't stay inside. Summoning every bit of strength he had left, he dragged himself toward the back door. The cold rain hit him the moment he stumbled outside, soaking his clothes and mixing with the blood on his shoulder. He collapsed near the fence, vision fading in and out. Through the sheets of rain, he saw a figure standing at the far end of the yard, a still, silent silhouette watching him with chilling calm. The world blurred around him, the darkness closing in as he slipped into unconsciousness, unaware of what would happen next. Jordan woke in the hospital with a heavy fog clouding his thoughts, his shoulder tightly bandaged and his body weak from blood loss. The police were already involved, gathering details from paramedics and neighbors who had rushed outside after hearing the gunshots. As the investigation unfolded, suspicion focused almost immediately on Edgar Holt. He had been the only person in the area with a history of strange, unpredictable behavior, and his house had long raised quiet concerns in the neighborhood. Officers wasted little time surrounding his property, prepared for anything, but what they found inside revealed a much darker reality than they expected. Edgar's home was eerily silent when the police entered. The living room was cluttered with papers, tools, and old electronics, as if he had been building and dismantling projects for years. Nothing looked dangerous at first glance, just the mess of a solitary man living in isolation. But the deeper investigators went, the more disturbing the atmosphere became. A narrow stairway led to a basement door that had been reinforced from the inside with metal brackets and heavy locks. When they finally breached it, the scene inside made it clear that Edgar had been unraveling for a long time. The basement resembled a hidden command center. Walls were covered with maps, diagrams, and lists of times and dates. Most of the notes focused on Jordan, his work hours, delivery schedules, light patterns in his house, and even the exact time he usually closed his curtains. Edgar had documented everything with obsessive precision. Stacks of journals revealed the thinking behind it. He believed Jordan was spying on him, infiltrating his privacy, and threatening his safety. None of it was true, but Edgar's mind had twisted harmless coincidences into imagined threats. Investigators also found evidence that Edgar had been preparing for a confrontation. Bullet casings were scattered across a makeshift workbench, and parts of weapons were stored in organized bins. In the far corner of the basement, they discovered a narrow tunnel carved into the dirt, a slow, unfinished attempt to reach the area beneath Jordan's fence. It wasn't complete, but it showed just how deeply Edgar had sunk into his paranoia. The most unsettling detail was how long Edgar had been watching. His notes went back months, long before Jordan realized anything was wrong. Edgar had convinced himself that he was acting in self-defense, even though Jordan had done nothing to provoke him. With the evidence overwhelming, Edgar was taken into custody and later transferred to a psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. The neighborhood, once so quiet, now stood shaken by the truth behind the man they had all carefully avoided. Jordan's recovery was long and grueling, both physically and emotionally. The gunshot wound to his shoulder left him weak for weeks, but the lingering psychological scars were far more difficult to overcome. Every creak of his new home, every shadow that fell across a hallway, triggered memories of that terrifying night. Even months later, the sound of rain against the windows brought back flashes of fear, and he found himself double-checking locks and scanning his yard in ways he never had before. The experience had changed him in ways he could not have anticipated, leaving him hyper-aware of danger in the most ordinary places. Despite the trauma, Jordan refused to let the attack define him. He began therapy to process the fear and anxiety that clung to him, slowly learning to regain a sense of safety in his environment. Each small victory, sleeping through the night, walking past a window without flinching, feeling calm in his backyard, was a step toward reclaiming control over his life. Friends and family provided support, but Jordan discovered a deeper resilience within himself, the kind that grows from surviving something unimaginable. The aftermath of Edgar Holt's arrest also brought a new perspective. Jordan learned that the man next door had been living in isolation for years, gradually descending into paranoia and obsession. It was a cautionary tale about how mental illness, when left unchecked, could manifest in ways that endangered others. Neighborhood meetings now included discussions about observing unusual behavior and reporting concerns, creating a culture of vigilance that had previously been absent. Jordan, once ignored, became an advocate for awareness, sharing his story to ensure that no one else would endure the same fear he had faced. Even as life returned to a semblance of normalcy, Jordan carried a sense of caution. Moving forward, he made deliberate choices to protect himself, from installing security systems to forging stronger connections with neighbors. Yet he refused to live in constant fear. He moved to a new home after several months, choosing a place where he could feel truly safe, and with every box unpacked and every familiar corner settled, he built a life shaped not by terror, but by resilience. Jordan's experience remained a vivid reminder of the fragility of safety and the unpredictability of those around us. The memory of Edgar Holt lingered, a shadow over what had once been a quiet street, but Jordan emerged stronger, wiser, and determined to never underestimate the hidden dangers that can exist behind seemingly ordinary doors. In the end, survival was not just about escaping the bullet, it was about reclaiming life after the darkness and refusing to let fear dictate the future.